So Halloween is my favorite slasher film franchise of all time, and I also absolutely love horror video games, so I practically keeled over and had a heart attack yesterday when IGN announced that not one, but 2 Halloween games were in active development. Both games are going to be published by Team Games and are said to have the producers of the Halloween film franchise and John Carpenter himself heavily involved, with at least one of those games being made with Unreal Engine 5. But anyway, I'm gonna discuss this news. I'm gonna give you guys my thoughts on it, but before we do that, consider subscribing. I talk about video games all the time on this page. I do day one reviews. I do other video game discussions. I don't typically talk about gaming news on this channel, but August is a really dry month. There's no new games to talk about, so I gotta start incorporating new content in some way. I'm also working on 2 retrospective videos that are gonna be by far the longest videos that I've made to date. But anyway, back to the Halloween news. As of now, we don't know what these games are gonna be. We don't know the genres, we don't know the developers, but I think it's safe to assume that at least one of these games is going to be an asymmetrical multiplayer horror game for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 being that new asymmetrical horror games are a dime a dozen these days. It seems like a new one comes out every 45 minutes. And reason number 2 being that the publishers of these upcoming Halloween games, Team Games, are the publishers behind Evil Dead the game. And the idea of an asymmetrical Halloween multiplayer game really excites me because I am a fan of that genre. I really like that genre, in fact, but it also starts to ring the alarm bells in my mind. Half of my brain is really excited because, again, I love asymmetrical horror games. I review and I discuss them all the time on this channel. I talked about Killer Clowns. I talked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I talked about Spirits Unleashed. Dead by Daylight is arguably my favorite multiplayer video game of all time. It's probably the multiplayer game that I have the most time spent in. But the alarm bells are ringing in the other half of my brain because it seems like with each new asymmetrical horror game that we get, the lifespan gets shorter and shorter, and the creativity gets smaller and smaller. For example, let's talk about Evil Dead the game for a second, the game that was developed by Team Games. I loved that game when it came out. It was a day one pre-order for me, and I played it non-stop when it came out, and I practically loved it. I felt like it was surprisingly well balanced. I actually remember a lot of the initial reviews praised the balance in that game. The core gameplay was super fun, especially as a demon in my opinion, but all of that goodwill lasted about, 2 weeks, maybe a month at most, because eventually they kept updating it and meddling with the game in a lot of negative ways, and it started to become incredibly unbalanced. And as far as I know, it never really recovered from that, and the player base is drier than a grandma in the desert planting a cactus next to a bowl of Triscuits. And then there's the second game that they're developing. Again, I feel like we can make some assumptions for this game as well. Like, I highly doubt it's going to be a third-person looter shooter, nor do I think it's going to be a platformer or a racing game. So anyway, since I recorded this video and as I was editing it together, more details on one of the Halloween games has come out, and ironically enough, it turns out it will be a retro style platformer, 16-bit. I'm not typically interested in that genre of video game, but for Halloween, I will definitely check it out. But it doesn't stop there. They also announced they are making an Ash vs. Evil Dead the game 16-bit platformer as well. That's another franchise that I absolutely love. Both games will be 16-bit retro games, and they will both launch on October 18th for $25 a piece or $50 for the pair. And they're kind of marketing it like a double feature, and they're really suggesting you buy both of them together. I think they said that you unlock some exclusive shit if you buy both of them. But anyway, back to my initial thoughts before this news came out. So with that being said, my hopes for a second Halloween game is I feel like the obvious and the safe choice, which is some sort of first-person survival horror stealth-driven experience. Something along the lines of Alien Isolation or the upcoming A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead. I don't know if I'd want the game to recreate any of the films, because to me that would be a bit too predictable and too boring. It wouldn't really have any sense of surprise, but maybe a game that takes place on the same night night as one of the films, like in between Michael stalking Laurie and Annie, and he crosses paths with the main character of this game and he hunts them down, and that could be the premise of the game that we're playing. Something with a lot of stealth. Michael would be a perfect enemy to constantly be hunting you down, like the Xenomorph from Alien Isolation or Mr. X from the Resident Evil 2 remake. But if you know me, you'd also know that I crave at least a little bit of combat in the horror games that I play, and I think that could fit in perfectly as well. Maybe you can have a gun with a very limited amount of ammo, and if you land enough shots on Michael, he'll go down for a short period of time and allow you to escape. But regardless, whatever these two games end up being, I know that I'm going to be hyped as hell, and I'm going to check them out and I'm going to play them no matter what they are, because just the fact that we're going to get two Halloween games is enough to just make me feel thankful as a fan of both Halloween and horror video games in general. But now I have 3 questions for you that I want you to answer in the comments down below. 1, what do you think of this news? Are you excited for 2 Halloween video games? 2, what do you want these games to be? What genre? Who do you want the developers to be? And 3, what are you realistically expecting out of these games? Do you think they're going to be good? Do you think they're going to be mid? Do you think they're going to be surprisingly amazing? But anyway, that's my thoughts on the news of 2 new Halloween games. Once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already. I talk about video games all the time. Definitely going to talk about these when they come out. But see you guys in the next video.